Well, space was once the domain of large government agencies. Think NASA or Russia's Roscosmos. Now, increasingly, private companies are the ones moving in. Space, it turns out, is big business, especially as demand for satellites grow. Now, currently, there are about 3,000 satellites in orbit. The U.S. by far has the greatest number, followed by China and Russia. However, more and more countries and companies are getting into the mix. So things are about to get more crowded, especially as companies lean on satellites for applications such as land mapping or GPS. Now, here's a look at what soon could be cruising in lower Earth orbit. As you can see, the current number there, around 3,300. Elon Musk's Starlink, his company, wants to send more than 40,000 satellites into space in the coming years. Now, Amazon plans more than 3,000, which seems like a tiny number compared to that one, but still almost double what's already up there. So who's delivering those satellites? That's where the market is growing.
Is this Germany's answer to SpaceX? The Spectrum carrier rocket is due for takeoff next year. This small launch vehicle has a diameter of just 2 meters and a payload of only 1,000 kilograms.
If you look at the technical developments in the recent decade or the recent 2 decades, you see that satellites keep becoming smaller and smaller. So the demand goes away from the very heavy lift launch vehicles that have been developed in mainly institutional development programs to small vehicles that can serve those dedicated small launch demands.
Mini rockets for mini satellites. The startup Isar Aerospace was founded 3 years ago by students in Munich. It now employs 150 staff from 30 countries. The prototype is already on display, but we're not allowed to film it. For now, everything is strictly under wraps.
Building a rocket is the most difficult thing you can do from a technological point of view. You are moving in areas of technology where you need to go to the absolute limits of what is achievable with current technology.
The journey to space will start in Norway, where a launch site for small satellites is currently under construction. Spectrum has reserved one of the 2 launch pads.
Many believe that space industry will be the fastest growing industry in the next decades and the coming decades. And I think this is correct. First of all, due to the increased use of data from satellites in Earth observation, communication, navigation, all kinds of infrastructure, and a modern society is dependent on the infrastructure in space.
Several satellites, but only a few launch vehicles. This is the gap in the market Isar Aerospace wants to fill. Demand is already high. As soon as the Norwegian launch site is completed, it will be time for takeoff.
I'm joined now by Ulrich Walter. He's a former astronaut for Germany and payload expert, and he's a professor at Technical University of Munich. Ulrich, it's great to have you on the show. Isar was founded by one of your former students. Is it alone in this field to some extent, or will we see more startups like it in the future?
There are already many startups, also in Germany. There's one in Augsburg called Rocket Factory Augsburg, and there's another one even called Heimpulse, which is located in Baden-Württemberg. So actually in Germany we have 3, and well, they will be in competition, but that's good.
What is it that's driving this growth? We saw a bit about those smaller satellites. Is that really what's behind it? Is that making it more accessible?
Yes, well, first it's money, of course, but there's a market already, because the classical satellite providers, they build satellites about 2 to 3 tons weight. Today, you can build satellites down to 100 kilograms. Usually, they are now about 200 or 300 kilograms. So they build new rockets, which can take 2 or 3 satellites. So in total, about 500 to 1 tons, 500 kilograms to 1 ton, and that's a new class of satellites. The old providers, the classical providers, they don't care about those satellites. They care only about these big satellites. So actually there's a new niche about new satellites.
Is that accessible considering the money that's out there? Obviously, startups see large amounts of money coming in, but we're talking about rockets and launching satellites into space. Is there the kind of money out there to support all of these startups?
Oh, yes, there is a money. Even the classical satellite providers are building down or sizing down their satellites to these very small satellites, about only a couple of 100 kilograms. So the market is there. However, the old providers like Ariane, they cannot change their rocket. They have the big rockets and they need to have big satellites to bring them in geostationary orbit. They cannot suddenly switch from a big to a small rocket.
Do you expect to see any crossover between these private efforts and Europe's public efforts, which it's also trying to boost, to do more in space, frankly?
Well, what we see is that ESA, like NASA, supports these small companies, space companies, in building smaller satellites and rockets. But it's not like that in NASA. Let me give you an example. ESA doesn't say, please provide a rocket for our purposes. That's not what they're doing. NASA does it. They go to Elon Musk and say, please build a rocket that we can fly to the International Space Station. So it's still different. However, ESA supports those small startup companies.
I have to ask you, can you imagine space tourism coming to Europe as well? You've been to space, you know the draw, you know how many people want to go up there. Could you see that? Briefly, if you can.
Oh, yes, there's a big space tourism market. Yeah, that's true. It will start most probably this next year with Branson. He's flying a suborbital flight. Suborbital means not going around Earth, but just going up and coming down, going to space. Yes, people are paying for that. The current price is $250,000 for a flight, which takes about an hour or so. So the market is there. And the most important point about that is that it lets the prices drop, not only for a flight, but the total prices for the entire market.
Ulrich Walter, astronaut for Germany, thank you so much.